I think you have to credit that to God. That wisdom that comes is almost intangible and elusive. But when you do look back, and we're forced to look back as humans, discovering how God works in our lives, very illuminating to me now. I have just a lot more eyesight because maybe my audience is always one now wherever I walk. But it's very clear to me how God has worked in my life to save me from the addictive qualities of music and provide the proportion and balance to be a better citizen,
Hello, welcome to the Flute 360 podcast, where we incorporate a panoramic view of flute-related topics. I am your host, Heidi K. Begay, and this is episode 34, an interview with Christopher Caliendo. Today's episode is sponsored by J&K Productions. They produce all of my episodes, from adding the intro and outro music to editing the audio and all post-production needs. Contact them for your next podcast project at jkproductions.media. Hi, Christopher. How are you?
Okay, you sound so loud and clear. It's like you're right next to me. Wow.
Perfect. Well, I wish I was at the Caliendo home eating dinner with you and Christian and Kristin.
Well, you'd have some of the best Northern Italian cuisine you'll find in America, that's for sure.
I know. When you post pictures on Facebook or social media, I'm always so jealous. I'm like, why am I not eating that right now?
Well, you're always welcome. Our door is always open to you, Heidi.
Oh, thank you, Christopher.
Just bring your flute so I can hear some duets.
Oh, yes, of course. I used to love playing with Kristin at U of A.
Oh, I'm sure. Thank you for having me on this show.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, thank you for giving me your time and your energy and your talent. I really appreciate you sectioning off a time in your busy day for me.
Yeah, not a problem. My pleasure. Great.
So for those of you who may not know you, could you please share with us your background and tell us who you are?
Oh, gee. Okay, so we'll start. I'll try to give you a shorter version, but if I can. But born in Jackson Heights, Queens, New York City. Mom and dad. Mom's Bolognese Italian. My father was a Korean War hero with 2 Purple Hearts. And I guess I adapted my mother's heart and her belief that if I was going to start composing music at a very tender age of 9, 10 years old, that if I can't sing it, don't write it, given the Italians are in love with melody. And I took that advice seriously. My dad, as a double Purple Heart hero in Korea, his discipline, his hardihood, his courage, his attention to his love for self-education were huge value propositions for me as a kid growing up. And since we were a family of 9, living in a house in Queens initially and moving to the island, money was hard to find in terms of supporting us. And my talents, I was a child prodigy guitar player and started playing professionally at 9 in New York City with the Mike Morris Quintet and learned jazz rather quickly and was able to improvise very early on. And so by the time I was 14, I mean, my parents didn't really understand what they had in their son per se. My father was just encouraging, and being one of 5 kids, my 4 sisters, he encouraged me to pursue music, soak up the world. And also, he was the wannabe musician, born Depression period, and coming back from Korea, he put a mailbag on his back to help and work at mobile gas stations to take care of the family. So he gave up the musical dream, and I took that very seriously. I couldn't imagine anyone giving up music for anything, and I was so imbued with it and was so fluent in my vocabulary that I took it very seriously. And to this day, my father and I have chats practically every day. He's the first person I share my music with, anything that I compose or write. But I was educated in Boston doing the Conservatory of Music. I was very fortunate to study modal counterpoint during a time today in the 21st century where modal counterpoint is no longer even taught at the conservatory level schools. It's very sad. But I studied one of the best in the world, Joe Maneri. I studied neoclassicism, music of Bartok and Stravinsky with Malcolm Payton. And of course, Gunther Schuller was the president at the time. The dean of the College of Music was a very dear friend of Henry Mancini, and peddling fast forward, ultimately called Henry and said, "This kid, belongs in Hollywood. He's gifted with melody. And of course, I was against the contemporary aesthetic then, which was dodecaphonic aleatoric contemporary music. Not that I couldn't write it, it just wasn't my voice. And I won Henry Mancini's film scholarship and was a protege of Henry Mancini and got a chance to get my master's degree at UCLA, where the scholarship was emanating from. And no sooner was during my student years, my graduate years, I had 2 teaching assistantships, and I was composing and orchestrating the music for 3 primetime television shows, Dallas, Knots Landing, and Paradise.
Wow.
And I was just immediately jettisoned into collaborating with many of the teaching faculty at UCLA, who also moonlighted as great recording musicians in the studios like MGM, Sony, and Lorimar, and those particular studios of that time that were still housing 24-piece orchestras, pickup orchestras, during the tail end of that great legacy of what we call film scoring with human beings. So yeah, in 91, all 3 shows left the air. I was thrown into what would be considered freelancing, and didn't know what that was since I was 9 years old, making money as a guitar player. So I was faced with that reality, and accumulated certainly enough wealth from television that I went to Italy. That was my first language, Italian. And so I went to Italy, and prior to dissension, a man came from the back of the plane, knew that I was up because I was listening to my Walkman at the time, a score that I wrote in Dallas for a show we did in Paris. And he said, I'm going to make you famous. This music is incredible. Come to Rome. And, I've heard that all my life. But he had to be his card. And this man managed Frank Sinatra, Liza Minnelli, even Morgan Hagler, boxer turned actor for a couple of movies, and engineered giant spectacles in Rome. So I went to Stazione Centrale in Rome, and 10 minutes after he picked me up, he took me right to the Vatican. And in the Vatican, behind the Vatican archives, all of these very ancient and very old uffici offices of the Vatican were all of John Paul II's top cardinals had offices. And I met Don Vigilio Levi, a Messianic Jew, Jewish turned Catholic, who literally commissioned all the painting, sculpture, and music for John Paul II. And no composer had ever been commissioned by John Paul II, no American composer. And so I was immediately sent to the Pantheon to meet Sandro Gindro, the director of this long festival called the Incontri di Musica Sacra Contemporanea Festivale, Encounters of Sacred Contemporary Music Festival, and basically had to play the pianoforte for the director, Sandro Gindro, of the festival. And 5 months later, I was called by the Vatican as the first composer in Vatican history to be commissioned by John Paul II, and I based my work on Teresa of Avila, 16th century Carmelite saint. And it was a vocal orchestral work performed at the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, the second largest basilica to St. Peter's, in a 3-day international festival on Rai 2 television. It was very successful. I was commissioned a second time and came home and was basically on the cover of the LA Times and New York Times calendar sections, heralding the American Composer Commission twice by the same Pope, first time in Vatican history. And I went back to Henry Mancini and said, what do? I'm having an identity crisis all my life. I wanted to be the next Verdi. Well, my father was telling me, that's great, but be the first Caliendo. But I have this thing with film, and I love chamber music, and I'm a jazz guitar player. I really didn't know what direction to take. So that kind of catches up. I think we're at 1991 right now. I'm not sure if this is where you want to stop, but
no, that's good. I love the history. Yeah, keep throwing it at me. Yeah.
All right. Well, some of it you do know, but in 95, I wrote another panel to the original commission, and staying with the 16th century Carmelites, I focused on her contemporary San Juan de Yepes, transformative to me. Many Catholics do not know their history. I've had a great opportunity to delve deep into Catholic history and found just some incredible jewels. San Juan de Yepes being the greatest of the jewels, outside of Augustine, of course, and even Martin Luther, who was a doctor of the Catholic Church. But certainly San Juan de Yepes transformed my life. And a mystic of the Carmelite order, he was actually ostracized by his own order because he was considered a heretic for his time, believing what the Protestants believe, that you can have a personal relationship with God on the planet here. He was ostracized for thinking like that. But I can go on and on with San Juan, but the important thing was that this is the most transformative work, I think, in my catalog. And I went back to for the second premiere, which is even more successful. John Paul II's doctorate was on at the University of Salamanca, was on San Juan de Yepes. So it was him who entrusted me, just compelled me to write something which was wonderful. It was all male choir, male soloists, full orchestra, and came back. And while I was writing the sacred music, I was also developing my catalog of chamber jazz works for my chamber jazz ensemble. Henry said I should bring my guitar. a composer who performs his own music is very valuable from a marketing degree. So Beverly Perlman, a manager out of New York City, took my chamber jazz group and managed it. And I was doing very well, getting commissions from senators, congressmen, very, very elite type of private affairs to have this fixed instrumentation of 7 musicians perform what I call chamber jazz. So European chamber music and American jazz together. So it provided me a huge canvas to explore everything from, early swing, even Mississippi music, string, minstrel music of the jazz, American culture, ethnicity, to all of the classical music that I had learned and techniques at the conservatory at UCLA. And it was a real playground for me in chamber jazz. You never knew what you got at a chamber jazz concert. I added voices, soloists, I added dancers, and I started to experiment with something called the tango. And because of my upbringing as an Italian American and just being so interested in ethnic music beyond the tarantella and the Italian string music of my culture, it really, unknowingly, I kind of landed into developing Caliendo Music Publishing in 1996-7 as a publisher fulfilling a niche for classical musicians, basically world music for classical musicians. That was my niche and target, and I started to create, due to the economic reform of the mid-90s when a lot of the groups, and we saw the beginning amelioration of the classical marketplace as a result of the publishing companies and the record companies becoming bankers and only supporting me up in the relatively known. A very good example would be Pavarotti. Even in his later life, they asked him, are there any more Pavarottis? And he said no. Today, the tenor gets his first break and gets paid $3,000. The agent comes in and wants $15,000 for the next performance. They stop educating their voice. There are no more Pavarottis coming up the grapevine. Well, that was a clear outcry to this steady, slow amelioration of classical music. And I felt it. And some type of, as a prophet, in one way, I said, I do not see the orchestra surviving, maybe my generation, but certainly the only extant musical group that will continue forever is chamber music. So I just made the decision that I was going to create a publishing company devoted to providing world music that sounds like inspired improvisation for young people, virtuosos in our institutions, academic university, conservatory institutions. So they have a place where they can learn how to play before, on, and after the beat. So I was developing that and performing that kind of music. And then when the mid-90s came, chamber jazz folded, despite some very strong history, great recordings, a lot of success, but the art crisis terminated that group. And Sheridan Stokes, the great flutist, who was the flutist for that group, said, these tangos are so successful. Why don't you rewrite them for flute and guitar? We'll record them, and I'll introduce you to the National Flute Association.
Wow. And
that's really how it started. We were fortunate to get chosen to perform one of the full concerts. And even more so, we were lucky, very lucky, that particular concert at the Rococo-styled operatic theater in Arizona, where the convention was, another fortunate aspect, because they had a really distinguished Rococo-styled small opera theater, which is perfect for me and my dancers. So I bring my dancers out, and the third trifecta in this was there were no competing concerts going on at the time. And so we had, almost 2,000 people come to that concert. And I sold 145 CDs, about $5,000 worth of sheet music. And I never stopped. I just said, wow, who would have thought this could have happened as a conservatory composer wanting to write operas. So, as we go forward, and Tango Americano was born in 1998. In 2000, I added Gypsy Americano. In 2003, World Music Collection came out with a lot of flamenco and Spanish styles. And I just kept adding libraries of music to what is now today about 370 SKUs for anything from solo flute to flute choir, flute orchestra, and everything in between.
Right.
And 13 flute sonatas now, and a number of works. By the way, during this period, I came back and I wrote 2 more panels and created a musical drama based on my spiritual commissions from the Vatican. And I did everything humanly possible. At the time, I cultivated many relationships with Emmy Award-winning talent in Hollywood. I got Steve Binder on board, the director of the Elvis Presley's incredibly successful 1968 Elvis Presley special, which revitalized Elvis Presley's career. Steve also directed, Michael Jackson at the Super Bowl halftime specials, major specialty director. I got Charles Listenby, who literally created the production sets for Radio City Music Hall and the Crystal Cathedral's Easter and Christmas specials. I got Simon Beatrice, who did all the lights for the original Cirque du Soleil shows, and Albert Fisher Merlis and George Merlis, television National Emmy Award-winning television producers, all on board to direct the Mystic Saints in the Jubilee year 2000 as a PBS special on St. Peter's Square, with Andrea Bocelli singing the role of St. Francis of Assisi and Annie Lennox from the Eurythmics singing Se Tre Servabile. The challenge here, again, the art crisis. I spent a lot of money trying to make this happen, and unfortunately, due to a lot of competitive events, and no one wanted to back, including PBS, a brand new musical drama for the church. They wanted their Hallelujah chorus, the typical icons, Bach. I went to Utrecht, Holland to try to mount it there. I went to St. Patrick's Cathedral, New York City, my hometown, to get it mounted there. Went back to the National Cathedral in Los Angeles, and I had a major kind of a breakdown in 2001, and I'd spent a lot of my energy and forces in that, and it took about a year and a half to recover before I just basically said, what happened? What happened to this enormous ambition, this self-directedness? And from a spiritual point of view, I look back and I just say, I lost God in that box. I played God. At some point, I thought this is the one-line resume. This is the Leonard Bernstein West Side Story. This is the thing composers go after their entire life, is that one-line resume that says, that guy did that.
Right.
And how could I not think this wasn't God endorsed? So I learned a great lesson in the papers. In 2002, I read a job offering at Manufacturers Bank, a commercial bank in Los Angeles, and I thought, what better way to learn wealth management than a bank? I applied for the job, sat in HR for 3 hours, and got it. And I've been a commercial banker ever since 2002. And ever since I made that decision to swing the pendulum from the left to the right side of the brain, meaning, in terms of my political stance, basically my values as a person, and certainly marrying Kristin and then blessing me with a son, that type of groundedness with the wonderful, innovative, creative side of my brain has really helped me make better decisions in life, and respect the greatest advocates of classical music, the ticket buying public, those creative people who work in mainstream middle market, who build and manufacture and distribute and import and export product, the private sector, which is, I believe, dutifully responsible for keeping classical music alive. So it kind of loosely brings us up to date, but that throws you a lot of information. But it's been an interesting journey. It really has. Yeah,
what rich opportunities and just neat experiences. And I mean, obviously, your hard work being put into it, the thousands of hours, but just it's beautiful to see you accrediting God and in saying that, look at all of this and giving him credit. I think that's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Well, I've made many mistakes in my life, and my testimony is just for others is music can be addictive. And when you are, and I'll try to say this without, I've had a prodigy type talent, and it becomes maybe more addictive. You have to be very careful because matter of fact, I just gave a speech to a corporate group of people. These are all multimillionaires in the corporate world. Yeah. And they asked me to give a presentation on how music is inextricably woven into man's physical survival. And I greedily grabbed the opportunity because my usual habitat is speaking in front of philosophy, aesthetics, music departments, humanities. And what an opportunity to say thank you with tremendous respect to the arrogant child who at 7, 8, 9, if you did not have a music education, I would walk away. I would literally just say, you're not valuable. You're not worthy to talk to. Wow. Because the only thing that matters is recreating reality according to man's metaphysical value judgments. End of story. Bye. And I was really, that person. I mean, I'm saying it probably in a more histrionic manner than I should, but I did not have the emotional IQ or the capacity to be empathetic or to even resolve to commit some serious time investment to understanding who you are and what is your world. As a banker, I'm forced to, and I just think it was God's way of saying, I love you. You're valuable to share your testimony, and you need some proportion and balance, and here's how I'm going to give it to you. And very much like Charles Ives, who sold insurance and had the benefit of governing his own aesthetics, I don't face the financial penury that some of my peers do.
Right.
I have to work twice as hard because I don't have as much time as I used to.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't go back, if you paid me, because my wife has taught me, who has a remarkable wisdom and IQ, emotional IQ.
Yeah.
It's far superior to mine. But when you have a child, it's an amazing, amazing transformation. And you just simply put your family above anything. And I think you have to credit that to God. That wisdom that comes is almost intangible and elusive. But when you do look back, and we're forced to look back as humans, discovering how God works in our lives, it's very illuminating to me now. I have just a lot more eyesight because maybe my audience is always one now wherever I walk. But it's very clear to me how God has worked in my life to save me from the addictive qualities of music and provide the proportion and balance to be a better citizen,
Mm-hmm. I don't know if, and I completely agree with everything you said. I don't know if it's because I'm in my mid-30s now and I'm having like a pre-midlife crisis. But, only because like I'm realizing the older I'm getting, that time is so precious and it's limited. And we can get so bogged into like, kind of like what you were saying, piggybacking off of that, like trying to get ourselves as musicians, as performers, composers, like in the limelight and like, look at me. And there's something I've been talking with Eric a lot lately, like, what am I investing my time into? And is it going to bring glory to God? Like, and because I have to be very careful with where I put my energy and time because those are resources, and I've decided that a lot of the, some of like the performing aspects of it, I just like feel my heart. And this is just my own personal like take and my own opinion. But for me, it's so easy to be like, oh, look at me. Look at what I'm doing. And it's so easy to maybe get caught up in that. And I am nowhere near levels of the history that you just shared with us so beautifully. But just those couple, those moments when you do get a sense of being in the limelight, you think, oh yeah, this is nice. And I can see how easily it could snowball into something dangerous.
Oh, sure. I remember, and I want to be very careful here. Maybe I'll go back to a traditional type of family unit. Eric has a wonderful practical job and he's very, very good at IT, and you're married, and not to say that your income is, especially in today's society where you look at, my wealth management advisors say 92% of Americans today at the age of 50 don't have $50,000 in their savings account. Wow. What does that say about consumerism? What does that say about invulnerability? But even as a woman who you have to accept the fact that the creative process is an I process. It is a selfish process. It has to be. And it's the same way for a manufacturer. An entrepreneur walks out of their room and says, gee, I see a need to build that type of helmet. It has to start with you. So be very careful of being trapped by people who may call your tendencies narcissistic as opposed to passionate. Jurisprudence over... because throughout that process, you have to recognize that the hardest thing is Christians face the dilemma of what is my purpose? What does God want me to do? And some people get trapped in that for so long, they never get out of it, never do anything.
Right.
So you have to accept music is an I process. It's me playing the flute. It's me walking on stage. And then you have to settle with yourself. If I'm fortunate, or I should say, if it's so happens that I waltz into a situation where I see a very large increase in cash flow and suddenly I'm becoming a household name, that's where God's tools keep you in check, which I didn't have at the time.
I see.
I did not instill the Bible studies, the reading of the Word every day, the accountability partners to maintain my life in credibility with God. And I got, we're talking, PBS, we're talking Andrea Bocelli. These are large, iconic things. But if you control them at a smaller level, you'll be much more prepared at a larger level.
Oh, I see. That makes sense.
Anyway.
Yeah. It's just like budgeting, like your finances. Like if God gives you a certain like salary and say it's, very minimal, like, I don't even know, just 30,000. And, you can be a good steward of those finances and that income. And, budget and do a lot with that money, make it really stretch and make it, put it where it counts, then you're going to be a better discipline with something like when you do, say, make 50, 100,000 a year, because when you're given those opportunities, like you can easily just lose sight of where you came from. And
very true. No, you do know. You're aware, and your consciousness is correct. I would just heartily endorse investing all the time, especially early. Your greatest commodity is time.
Yep.
If you feel you're precedented by the entropy of what you think financial savings is, in other words, I should be investing $1,000 a month, and if I'm not going to invest. Right. Fallacy. Invest 50 a month if you can. Invest 50 a week if you can. But make sure you do it consistently. And 30 years from now, you'll be very grateful. I promise.
Yeah, I bet. Well, from all of that, going back to bringing it full circle, I just really, it pulled on my heartstrings when you said, about your background, your musical background, starting with, your father and how he had to let that go. If you couldn't sing it, not worth writing it, that really stuck out to me. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that very personal side to it.
Yeah. Pleasure.
So your canon and your repertoire is ginormous. And like you just said, you were listing off numerically, how many flute sonatas, etc. So every piece is unique, of course. But generally, when you compose a new work, what is your process like?
Okay. I'm just trying to think because each commission is different.
True.
And depends on what idiom, film scoring, maybe I'll give a little theatrical film scoring, whatever it is, but these processes are all different. Very quickly, 20th Century Fox had called me in. When you get called in by a film studio and you walk into a room and there are 8 people, that means you've got the job.
Okay.
When you walk in and see 1 or 2, they're obviously considering other composers. When it comes to 8 people, I just bring a calculator. And I have 1 question or 2 questions. How many minutes of music are required, and what's the deadline? And I just simply divide the number of days they give me, which is generally 25, into the amount of And I know that if I'm healthy, I can get up to 11 minutes of fully orchestrated music a day and publish and orchestrate it. Wow. For about a 35-piece orchestra. I can do 11 minutes a day. If it's beyond that, then obviously I have to reevaluate the commission. So the process is numerical. It's actually very practical. It doesn't make a difference what style of music it is because fortunately I can write any style of music. That has always been easy for me.
Okay.
When it comes to theater, people come to me for various reasons. They say, you have an existing title. Matter of fact, yesterday, for example, I just heard La Milonga for a full flute choir and 12 guitars.
Wow.
I love this idea, and in April of 2019, we've got this festival, and can I commission you to do? So I basically asked them, number one, are you commissioning me for a existing title or a new title?
Okay.
So if it's a new title and it's coming from the private sector, there's not a major commission behind it. I generally charge $1,000 per minute of new music.
Okay.
And I ask if it's multi-movement. We find out how many minutes of music. It's always how many minutes of music, and here's a dollar amount associated with that minute.
Okay.
And then, of course, that's dependent upon how many forces, because it's always in Hollywood. Actually, you come up with a pretty good metrics, because when you orchestrate and get commissioned back in the day, you would charge the client by how many staves, because that basically tells you how much writing is involved. If it's 30 forces or 10 forces at 2. So we come to an agreement. Sometimes they come to me and they know that I'm a world music guy, and they have a Spanish program, a flamenco program. So then it's easier to say what style they want. But it's generally determined. Process is how many minutes of music, how many forces. Where is the money coming from? Is this a consortium? That happens to me a lot. We've got 5 colleges involved. They're all contributing a certain amount of money. On the orchestral level, and I have a ton of orchestral music, I have very strong relationships with different conductors all over the world. And generally, they know my style or they prefer a certain style. And for instance, I was asked to do my own rendition of the music for The Hobbit. And that was I have a series of symphonic pieces called symphonic portraits.
Oh, yes,
and basically, these are musics that's commissioned on well-known literature that has been successful in movies. So whether it's Sherlock Holmes or The Hobbit or Tarzan, I have different pieces like this. So we know what the topic is. And I have to tell you, the commissions for these are so varied. And I tell this to young composers. I say, you know, sometimes you do something for free because of the strategic alliance. You know that the work is going to have many performances, or it's going to be recorded, or the artist involved, i.e. the conductor involved, is so well known, it's to your advantage in this dying, shrinking marketplace. So take the commission and find time to write it. Okay. So that's happened to me. Or I have a very good relationship with the board of directors, and they just love my music, and every 2 years they commission me, like the Pacific Symphony Orchestra. Or the United States Air Force will commission me on special moments like the 70th anniversary of D-Day. They reached out and commissioned a new... Now, that's an interesting case, because when Obama was, a week before he was inaugurated, a standard commission for a 3-minute work from the Air Force would be $20,000. Wow. So I was literally contracted. And then a week later, Obama was put into office, and I got a call from the colonel from DC, and he said, I can only pay you $3,000. Wow. So things change. You know, I talk about this often about style and process. And number one, find out who is the commissioned officer, find out what the outreach is, whether it's social media, which I don't really believe. I have a very, very suspicious predilection about the effect of social media, and I probably have a very strong justification for that, given I created the Tutti Flute Academy. Yeah. And we haven't spoken about that, but essentially, if you look at the analytics, 25 major flute stars, 25 social media platforms, and when you look at the analytics, 17% of our subscribers came from social media. The rest came from mass emailing through well-known retail shops like Flute World and Flute Specialist and my own database. But that said, there's a checklist before you make the decision to do anything for free. Again, if the exposure is great, if you have access to the database, it's great, and you create a strategic alliance. If you feel there is continuance after that commission, there are other opportunities that you negotiate and talk about, you make that decision as either a performer or a composer to write, quote unquote, for free. Nothing is for free. Right. There's always an exchange. You just have to be very strategic with that.
Right. Yeah. Even like about the time I was graduating last May, there was, I won't say the name of the shop in town, but there was a Texas music store that said, hey, you know, I really like what you're doing with Flute 360 podcast. Can you make some teaching videos? And I said, okay, great. So let's sit down and talk business. And they said, oh no, you record at home in front of a green screen. We know your husband's an audio engineer and a video engineer, and you will produce these videos every week. And I said, is there going to be a subscription or, you know, some kind of, you know, what's the compensation for me? And they said, oh no, we would like for you to do this for free. And I said, are you kidding me? Like, because it's your time, it's your equipment, and it's your expertise and your knowledge. And so, yeah.
I think today, and I know this for a fact, that the strength in negotiation is always going to be database. You create a very large database. For instance, I'm working with a Swedish doctor that has created a platform called Sustainable Soundtracks. Okay. So he's a Swedish doctor, surgeon, who's also a composer, and for the last 25 years has always composed pop songs about saving the planet. Wow. On the investment side, it's called Impact Investments. It's a $288 billion industry. And ultimately, you know, they came to me to look at their pro forma and business model. And I came back with some, you know, really strong ideas saying you really need to restructure this, and you need to become known as the go-to to commission your songwriters. For instance, a publicly traded company with 18 million clients just hires Sustainable Soundtracks to write a song for their platform. I said, great. Did you get a hold of the database? Do you have access to the database? And so the idea being that database is king. Once Sustainable Soundtracks has a distribution of, let's just say, 20 million stewards, then you may get a Lady Gaga submitting a song because they have the distribution, right? So today, everything's about creating a business model where you can manage a very large database. Once you have the database, you can do anything you want with it.
Oh, cool. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Since this is a flute podcast, when you're composing specifically for the flute, what are some of your goals or ideas writing for this instrument?
Well, I remember Pacao came up to me and he put his hands on my shoulders and said, thank you so much for what you're doing for our instrument. And believe it or not, I didn't know who he was at the time.
Wow.
Someone came up to me and said, do you realize that was Picard who just said that to you?
Wow.
And I was so grateful for the compliment later, in hindsight, thinking, and hearing him play. That's a question that allows me to penetrate some of the deepest feelings I have. I write what I hear.
Okay.
And I think one of the best musicians that ever explained Christopher Caliendo to me was the pianist Bryan Pezzone, my long-term friend. And Bryan said Christopher is an idea writer. In other words, in Beethoven's time, if you were a pianist and played the Waldstein, you would have a lot of difficulty given the pedagogue of the day.
Okay.
Because your hands are trained in the classical style, and along comes this force of nature. And it was probably very difficult for them to play the Waldstein like Beethoven. So my point is, when I write for the flute, I can't help but write what I hear naturally, and it's up to the flutist to figure it out. And I think over the many years, the Amy Porters, the Carol Wincences, the Robert Langevin, the Nestor Torreses of the world, the Vivianas that play my music, it has taken time, Marianne Gedigian, for the Caliendo flute style to find its place in the natural standard literature of the flute. It's not that I choose to write quote-unquote difficult or wordy music. I write what I hear.
Okay.
There's plenty of pieces in the catalog that are simple, of course.
Right.
But I'm writing now my 13th Flute Sonata for Amy Porter. And when I think of Amy, who I've written two other sonatas for, three other sonatas for, I revel at pushing the envelope.
Okay.
And not for difficulty's sake, just because I like Stravinsky, I guess like Beethoven, when they sat down, they probably thought, I'm capable of pushing the envelope, and this is what I naturally hear in my spirit. So it just, when you hear Amy play the Ghost Sonata, for example, Movement 1, which was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado, I'll never forget the moment I heard the theme for that was actually from a television show. And I heard Lex Baxter, a film scorer, I heard his theme, and I said, oh my goodness. And I ran to the piano room and said, I could do something with that in a different direction. And as I was writing it, in my mind appeared the first paragraph of The Cask of Amontillado from Poe. It was the madness of carnival. And I thought, that's it. This music is about capturing Fortunato walking down in the midst of carnival. And how do I explain that in music? And immediately I heard Amy playing it. It just was a natural, and it comes across as very challenging rhythmically, but when it's pulled off, I'm as high as a kite. It's just terrific.
How neat.
Yeah, it's fun.
I had a music theory professor at Texas Tech say that when he writes, sometimes the actual end result, the performance of his piece never really comes out quite as he envisioned it in his mind. Does that resonate with you at all, or no?
Oh, gee. No, it's a very interesting question. I've never been asked that. Listen, I think, let's just take ego out of the picture. This has nothing to do with ego. I think a composer hears, when they hear the music, at least when I hear the music, it's pristine. It is exactly according to the metaphysical process, recreating reality, from the abstract into perceptual awareness.
Right.
And so I hear it as it should sound. There are times when it comes back refreshingly better. Yeah. If it's larger forces, for example. Okay. And there are many, 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 many times when you just sit back and go, and you're cringing. And Kristin my legs start shaking. She knows right away. And I don't look at the stage. I just look down. So there's a variety of interpretations of and experiences I've had. But I can certainly point out that when an Amy Porter plays my music, when a Bryan Pezzone plays my film music on piano, I mean, there are those individuals that really get me. Okay. And I can expect some wonder.
Yeah, some magic.
Some magic and Robert Langevin, when he played the Sixth Flute Sonata. Oh, what a trip that was, because here's the New York Philharmonic's, probably our best example of the French school outside of China's young flutist, who was on my flute academy, who studied with Robert Langevin. His name doesn't come to my mind right now. But when I heard Robert practicing and I met him practicing the music, I didn't think he had any projection. I didn't think he had no projection at all, because I was so used to writing and hearing the Amy Porters, the American flutists. This is the first time I'm hearing a Quebec, Canadian, French proponent of the French school. And then he waltzed on stage during the concert. I'm in the back of the hall going, and I couldn't believe the power of his communication skills. It totally fooled me. I've never experienced anything like that before in my life. So that was and that's on YouTube. That's on my site. And that's a performance that's just unbelievable.
Oh, nice. I can't wait to check that out.
That was based on the Moulin Rouge painter Lautrec, Toulouse-Lautrec, Fourth Circus Prince for Robert Langevin. Yeah.
How neat. So you've kind of mentioned this within our previous conversation, but for the budding new composer, is there any advice that you would give to him or her?
Oh, sure. First, a lot of us don't recognize that there are themes in childhood that show remarkable stability into adult life. Very few of us. And I could point out an excellent example of that would be Jackie Chan, who I had a chance to work on a film with. And I asked Jackie once, I said, what three things in childhood shaped who you are today? And he immediately said, brought up in Beijing, China, acrobatic, family. Then I saw The General, starring Buster Keaton, a silent film classic, and fell in love with film and comedy. And then in 1973, Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee, and I fell in love with martial arts, and I combined them, and that's who I am. And he just knew. And so that was the basis of the Tutti Flute Academy was, can I create a educational platform to induce young people to bring this thought into consciousness that we are an adult life really formed by the themes that resonate in childhood. So when I think of this, I think for composers today everything is so important about marketing and niche, and unfortunately our school systems are going through a terrible change. Even I will not name names specifically, but there are too many colleges of music now who have given up classical composition techniques and thrown themselves into the digital age and literally telling their composing students, film scoring, film composing is where it's at. That's what we're teaching. We're transforming because we're not getting enough students. Wow. It's so sad because compositional technique is critical. So that said, I would say, number one, find out those themes that resonate in childhood. Then combine them. When you combine them, you are marketing yourself early on, and you're developing the ability to rudder your marketing plan, your operations plan into how your website will be formed, the type of music you will want to compose, how you're going to market your music. It all comes, and this goes for performers especially as well. Yeah. Take an early interest. I have taught as a specialty teacher from Frost School of Music to USC. And I can't tell you how many times even the faculty doesn't know how to protect and copyright their music. They don't know the 11 income streams that composers have access to today. Learn where your income's coming from. You spend all this time learning technique, hopefully, and writing music and feeling really good while you have architecture in college. And once you graduate and that big ubiquitous question faces you, what do I do next? You've got to understand intellectual property. You've got to understand the 11 income streams, and you've got to learn that you could dovetail and synergize these streams to make more money strategically. Learn how to publish your company. Make sure you perform your own music. It's very critical that you get on stage and be seen by the public gaze. You'll be able to negotiate better. More opportunities will come your way if you're a performer of your own music. Learn different styles. The more different things you get involved in, including conduct your own music, you'll find paychecks coming in from different sources at the end of the month. You may be able to pay your fixed and variable costs. Be frugal. When you get a big paycheck, if you're lucky to film score, don't buy a car right away. I mean, a lot of guys do that. Yeah. The music industry is a very perturbing entity. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry with no architecture. Now, we're talking the freelance composer performer. I'll work at 20th Century Fox and make a considerable amount of money, perhaps, people would think, in 3 or 4 weeks, and then I'm thrown out into the orbital station, it's an artificial waste station circling the major studio, waiting for the next job. So be very frugal, take some wealth management courses, make sure that once you buy property, your first home, make sure a third of your net income is your mortgage or less. Don't go beyond it. There's just some rules. And this is what I teach in colleges. Wow. I don't teach technique. I don't teach how to compose. I expect every composer to be able to write any style of music without a piano on a desk because they've taken the right solfege. They've developed their ear training skills. And then I talk about the value of writing free.
Yeah.
You have to go through life performing and composing for free to develop your stable of strategic alliances.
Yep.
Very critical, because as you see, and also the value of a CRM, I tell young composers today, your classmates are your first Excel spreadsheet. You should get everyone's address and numbers, put them in an Excel spreadsheet if you can't afford a community CRM, because every CRM can import from an Excel spreadsheet, but make sure you stay in touch with your classmates. They could give you a job. The importance of the daytime job when you're in college. Instead of getting that Starbucks cool social hip thing, by the way, Starbucks is laying off 42,000 employees, by the way, so I wouldn't recommend going to Starbucks. But I would certainly think, okay, if I'm, the value of self-publishing your music today is critical. You have to self-publish. You got Finale, Sibelius. So you have to learn business. You have to learn how to create an independent publishing company. You have to learn how to distribute. You have to learn how to protect your PDFs with tracers. But all of this is prevalent on going back in time. Say, gee, I loved comic books as a kid. I loved ice cream. I loved playing the guitar. How do I combine these three to create a unique image about myself that is going to distance myself from my competitors?
Right.
It's just crazy. Listen, I love cooking Italian food. So I was living in Toluca Lake, and across the street, my friend Sean, who owns a film restoration lab where all the silent films would go to be restored, he walks across the street with a friend. And it was Sunday, and every Sunday I make a pot of bolognese meat sauce. So he walks in with this guy named Grover. And I said, well, if your friend is Sean, you're a friend of mine, have a bottle of bolognese sauce, take it home and enjoy it.
Yeah.
So that guy was the head of film restoration for Sony Pictures.
Wow.
Now, it's a fluke, but I was exercising one of my principal themes, the joy of cooking.
Right.
So this guy, you could imagine, if I knew he was that person, the first thing I would have done was saying, oh, listen to my music, because that's what composers do.
Yeah.
But instead, I'm throwing him a jar of bolognese sauce, and the guy just thought, what a cool dude.
Yeah.
So what happened was he came to my concert. He happened to be a hobby guitar player. He fell in love with my music. And there was an opportunity to hire me at Sony Pictures for a small little silent film just to get me into the system. And he hired me to do that. And I knocked the score out in 3 weeks. And then in 2004, the biggest break of my career came when he asked me to score Major Dundee with Charlton Heston, a Sam Peckinpah Western, and no film composer in the history of film scoring had ever composed an entire soundtrack to replace the pre-existing one. And I was on the cover of the Hollywood Reporter just because of that bolognese sauce.
Wow.
So that's my point. You got to look at these themes. I don't care what they are. They can be so distant from music, but you can really market yourself by combining the top 3, 4, 5, whatever, and saying, gee, this is a cool way of marketing myself. And I guarantee you that it will affect the kind of music you program, the kind of clothes that you may wear, the kind of website you put together. You'll find authors that somehow the water is constantly in their novels. And then you go back in time and you realize they were born on the beach. There's some really interesting themes there that resonate with us. So those are my recommendations for young composers and performers.
That's great. That's a wealth of information. I really appreciate that.
No, you're welcome. You're very welcome.
What I heard in that too, the main theme that I was pulling out of that was just being an entrepreneur and just knowing the business side of things. That's great. Yeah. So in the last segment of the show, I have a portion called Picks. And this can be music related or not music related. It's just something fun for the listeners to kind of see what you're using at home, or so it could be an item, it can be a service that you've used, it could be a movie or a book title. Do you have a pick for this week?
I have 40 of them. Assuming in my head. I was thinking of software, the Trello, but in terms of a marketing plan, operations plan, I get to know Trello. It's a fantastic software for organizing your rudder, your ship. In terms of movies, All the Mornings of the World, my favorite film on music. It's a French film starring Gerard Depardieu and his son, but it explains the reason music exists better than any other movie devoted to music.
Oh, wow.
And I won't tell you the ending, but it goes right up until the ending. And it's just a poetic verse, filled with poetic verisimilitude. It's a fantastic film. European film, French film.
Oh, wow.
All the Mornings of the World. Yeah.
I'll have to watch that this weekend. That sounds fascinating.
Every composer and performer should watch that film. Yeah.
Very cool.
Wonderful.
Well, my pick for this week is a pedagogical one. Most flutists have heard of it, but I'm using it a lot in my lessons with my beginners and also advanced students, and I'm noticing a huge change in their sound and improvement in their sound, and that's the Numo Pro by Kathy Blocky. And it's
Kathy Blocky.
Yeah, it's this yellow
Nice
plastic flute head joint that you put into the silver body, and it has these 4 fans. And so it teaches the student air direction, and it can help them with intonation and dynamics, and also with like multiple tonguing, like double tonguing and triple tonguing. And I'm noticing a huge improvement, like I said, from beginners, intermediate, advanced, and collegiate students with their tone production and articulation. So that's my pick for the week.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
A welcome pick, as they say.
There you go. Oh, shoot.
I like Blocky's been a friend, off and on for many years. She's a very sweet lady, very, very entrepreneurial.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good example of being an entrepreneur and, and a musician.
Yeah, including our lady who made a flute scooter.
Yes.
Another and Viviana Guzman with her cosmetic line.
Yes. Yep. And I think Amy Porter, doesn't she sell candles?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think she's got like a little like candle shop that sometimes she promotes on social media as well.
Okay.
But that could just be her, another artistic side, outside of flute and music, something crafty and, something homemade. I don't know if she makes them, but I could swear I see jewelry that she puts out there and also candles. But
well, speaking of jewelry, Ellen Burr.
Yes. Yes.
A very dear friend of mine. She went through some challenging times last year, and I tried my best to guide her and help her through it. Relocation, bunches of stuff, but she never has stopped. Her father was a scientist, and she is as well. And very omnibus, very multifaceted person, Ellen Burr. Good person. Yeah.
How neat.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, and I'll let you go so you can eat some dinner. You have safe travels this week, and send all my love and hugs to your family.
Yeah, I will. Especially, I'll call Kristin later tonight and tell her she knows we're speaking today. And please give a hug to Eric and his disciplines. I know he's your rudder there as well.
Yes.
And helping you on these projects. It's very, very noteworthy of him.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I'll let you go, but thank you for your advice and the talk. And I learned a lot just hearing you give your expertise.
No, thank you, Heidi. You're very welcome. And we're all students, right? We're always students. So, like my dad said, be a sponge. Soak up the world.
Beautiful. I couldn't agree more. You have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks for being a part of mine.
Thank you. Today's episode is sponsored by J&K Productions. They produce all of my episodes, from adding the intro and outro music to editing the audio and all post-production needs. Contact them for your next podcast project at jkproductions.media. Thank you for listening to the Flute 360 podcast. For more information, please visit HeidiKBegay.com. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review in the iTunes store. Let's talk about flute.